Welcome, one and all, to the first inquiry into the sinking of the RMS Titanic in over a century. My name is James Penca, and you are listening to Witness Titanic, a podcast where we interview witnesses of her great story, from modern Titanic experts to even the survivors of this infamous sinking. As always, we may never fully determine what really happened on the night of April 14th, 1912, but you may be surprised to find how close our efforts will bring us to Titanic herself. Folks, welcome back to the inquiry. It has been months since we adjourned for a bit of a winter recess, but we're back. It's April. The anniversary is coming up on the 14th, so what better time to dive back into the testimony and get this inquiry back in session. Before we begin, I just wanted to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for tuning in to those first 21 episodes and 2 bonus episodes. It was an absolute joy to see the response from our growing community, such kind comments, kind emails, people saying that they're just getting into Titanic and this is like such a great gateway. Other people who have loved Titanic forever and they're just seeing it in a new light, not knowing that all this testimony existed out there. There's just been so many, such a varied group of people. Those messages just make it all worthwhile. So thank you for listening. If you sent something in, thank you. I hope I was able to respond to it. I'm pretty sure I responded to everyone who sent me something. If I missed yours, I apologize. But yeah, just wanted to say thank you. This has been super fun, and I'm so excited to be back. Now on to some changes. As you should know by now if you heard my update episode I released at the beginning of the month. If not, go back and listen. We have a brand new Instagram at Witness Titanic Pod. Follow me there for episode updates, accompanying visuals, and some short form Titanic stuff. We will also be posting full video versions of every episode in a new place now on the Titanic Honor and Glory YouTube channel, which is at Titanic HG. So definitely subscribe over there. But most exciting of all, I have a Patreon now, patreon.com/witnesstitanic. You can join our little community, talk Titanic with all the people who are already over there, vote on who should testify next, get episodes early, get bonus testimony, and so much more. For more info on all of these changes, links are in the description. I really hope to see you over on the Patreon. We are already voting on who should testify next. The options are Third Officer Pittman, Archibald Gracie, first class passenger, and the Bishops, which were a married couple that testified. So if you want to vote on who should testify next, I will see you over on Patreon. And shout out to all of our patrons who already joined. Now, with all that housekeeping out of the way, as the chairman of this inquiry, I think it's time we call our first witness of Season 2. Folks, today we will call to testify Frederick Fleet, one of Titanic's surviving crew members. Now, why interview Mr. Fleet? What experiences would he have to share with us? What role did he play in this disaster? Many of you out there already know, but if you don't, I'm not going to ruin the surprise. What is your full name?
Frederick Fleet.
Where do you reside?
Southampton.
England?
England.
How old are you?
25 next October.
What is your business?
Sailor. Lookout man.
How much experience have you had in that work?
About 4 years. I was 4 years on the Oceanic, on the lookout.
So there you have it, our first testimony of our new season. As you may recall from last time, I love these opening questions. I love hearing from the survivors how they describe themselves. So there's nothing more historically accurate than Frederick Fleet referring to himself as a sailor, lookout man. I think that's really cool. 2 things to point out about this before we move forward. 25 next October, so he's 24 at the time of the tragedy. I find that amazing because growing up, Frederick Fleet was a grown-up to me, and the gentleman they cast in the film, maybe he's a little older than 24. But I don't know. I just you don't think about these people's age until you read it and you go, gosh, this guy was a kid. I'm almost 34. I'm going to turn 34 this year. So I'm almost 10 years older than he was, and that just breaks my heart. The other thing to point out, for those out there who are fans of the Broadway musical, Titanic the musical, it is spectacular, trust me. One of the lyrics is Frederick Fleet, who's in the musical. He's one of the characters. He proudly announces that he is Frederick Fleet, lookout off the Majestic. He was actually off the Oceanic, but I suppose Mari Eston, the lyricist, the word majestic sounds a little bit better. So now that we've gotten to know him a little bit, let's hear a bit about what it's like to be a lookout aboard a ship like Titanic. What is the watch? It is 2 hours on and
4 hours off.
Who was on watch from 8 to 10 that night, in the crow's nest or lookout?
Simons and Jewel.
Who was on watch from 6 to 8?
Hogg and Evans.
Basically, a lookout has the shortest shift of any crew member on Titanic, just 2 hours at a time. But don't forget, it's 2 hours on and 4 hours off. So like much of the crew of Titanic, they only get 4 hours off at a time. As I did last year when we talked about the officers and whatnot, I just have to ask you to think about what it would be like to not sleep for more than 4 hours at a time for an entire week. It has to be truly exhausting. Now, these guys only have to work for 2 hours at a time because they're up in the elements in the crow's nest, getting beat by rain and wind. It's got to be awful. So 2 hours is pretty nice for them. But we also hear the names of some of the other lookouts, Simons and Jewel, Hogg and Evans. And then there's one other, there's Reginald Lee, who is his partner when he's up in the crow's nest. So these names are important because there's something fascinating about the lookouts. They cycle. They're only on for 2 hours at a time, and there's 3 shifts total. So there's a 1 in 3 chance that you are going to be the lookout when the iceberg collision happens. So all of these guys barely escaped that historic weight being put on their shoulders. The last thing I'll say about the lookouts as a whole is actually something that Lightholler said. I don't believe we touched on it in his episodes last year, but there's a quote from Lightholler sort of speaking on behalf of the White Star Line, pointing out something that White Star Line does that's actually a good thing in regards to safety. He says this:
The White Star Company, I may say incidentally, is the only company in the world, so far as I know, that carries 6 lookout men. We carry men who do nothing else night and day from the commencement to the finish of the voyage except keep a lookout.
Interesting quote from the second officer of Titanic, just sort of confirming for us the White Star Line takes this part of their safety seriously. So an interesting thing from Lightholler to put in there. Don't forget, the White Star Line actually is pretty safe. If you're still wondering why we've called Fleet to testify, I think these next few questions will pretty much spell it out for you.
I fetched her around from Belfast on the lookout.
And made this voyage from Southampton to the time of the collision, the accident?
Yes, sir.
I want to get on the record the place where you were stationed in the performance of your duty.
I was on the lookout at the time of the collision.
There you have it. If it wasn't obvious already, Frederick Fleet is the most famous lookout in maritime history. He was the first person to see the iceberg, the very person who uttered those 3 now infamous words, iceberg right ahead. This is why we must hear his testimony. The Titanic disaster starts with him. What time did you take your watch Sunday night?
10 o'clock.
Whom did you relieve?
Simons and Jewell.
What, if anything, did Simons and Jewell, or either one, say to you when you relieved them from the watch?
They told us to keep a sharp lookout for small ice.
So we heard Lightoller all the way back in episodes 5 and 6, I believe, that he told 6th Officer Moody to ring up the crow's nest and then to tell them to keep a sharp lookout for ice, for small ice, particularly small ice and growlers, I believe, and then to pass the word along. And so we're hearing from Fleet in this moment that order was carried out and he was informed of it. So when he sees the iceberg that sinks Titanic, he has been warned ahead of time, as Lightoller hoped he would have been. There's no question that the iceberg collision, from Fleet's perspective, is extremely important and a very valuable part of his testimony. We will get to that in a moment. But there's one other part of his testimony that has almost as much of a lasting effect on how we talk about Titanic today. And I want to jump to that part here. And that is on the subject of glasses, which is what they called binoculars at the time. So you will have undoubtedly heard in your Titanic studies that the lookouts were not given binoculars on this very fateful Atlantic crossing. We touched on it briefly last season with Lightoller, and then again when we watched James Cameron's film together. You likely feel that this lack of binoculars is a travesty. You know, how against common sense could that be than to not give lookouts binoculars? Well, who better to tackle this common Titanic talking point head on, pun intended, than one of the lookouts themselves? So first of all, we should be clear, lookouts using binoculars was just not the norm on ships at the time. They didn't even keep binoculars in the crow's nest. The lookouts had to go down to the bridge and ask for them if they wanted them, and sometimes there just weren't enough to go around. Some lookouts would go their entire career and never even touch a pair of binoculars. Again, this sounds preposterous, but remember what Lightoller told us last season, that glasses were not just unnecessary in a crow's nest, but he said that they could be detrimental. This is an opinion shared by other officers and even some of Fleet's fellow lookouts, that their job is to use their naked eye to see objects on the horizon and call the bridge, and the officers use their binoculars to assess further. If a lookout has a pair glued to their eyes, as Lightoller says, it greatly restricts their vision. They really should only be used to identify objects already spotted. And we also should remember that this disaster took place at night, and binoculars are pretty much useless at night, as light is a requirement for them to work. I suppose if you saw the lights of a ship on the horizon, you could use them, but if you are in pitch black darkness and you're trying to see a pitch black object, the binoculars are not going to help you. So we know Officer Lightoller would say that glasses are not necessary in a crow's nest, but let's ask today's witness what he thinks. Are you given glasses of any kind?
We had none this time. We had nothing at all, only our eyes to look out.
On the Oceanic, you had glasses, had you not?
Yes, sir.
Did you make any request for glasses on the Titanic?
We asked them in Southampton, and they said there was none for us.
Whom did you ask?
We asked Mr. Lightoller, the 2nd officer.
You expected glasses.
We had a pair from Belfast to Southampton.
You had a pair of glasses from Belfast to Southampton?
Yes, sir, but none from Southampton to New York.
Where did those go that you had from Belfast to Southampton?
We do not know that. We only know we never got a pair.
Suppose you had glasses, such as you had on the Oceanic, or such as you had between Belfast and Southampton. Could you have seen this black object a greater distance?
We could have seen it a bit sooner.
How much sooner?
Well, enough to get out of the way.
There you have it. Fleet pointing out multiple interesting things here. One, that they had a pair, they asked about having a pair, they clearly wanted them, they didn't get them. And not only that, but they asked Officer Lightholler himself, the very man who tells us that they're not necessary. So it's a bit of an interesting who to believe, he said, she said, because of course Lightholler would want us to think that binoculars aren't necessary because he was the one who didn't give them to them. And Fleet, of course, wants us to believe that they're very necessary because he was the one who should have seen the iceberg. So, who to believe? That is the fun of this testimony. But he does say just flat out that if they had glasses, he would have seen the object sooner, well enough to get out of the way. That comment is where this whole binoculars thing comes from. He literally says that they probably would have seen the iceberg ahead of time if they had binoculars. And so that comment sort of lasts through history, and here we are still talking about it. Did you have the same glasses for night and for day?
Yes, sir.
And the glasses that are useful for day are also useful for night?
Yes, sir.
Equally useful?
Yes, sir.
Whoa. This is where I start to sort of divert from believing Fleet a little bit. I should little disclaimer here. I got if I got any negative feedback from the first season of this podcast, it was pretty much only the way I talk about Bruce Ismay and how I defend him and how I have pretty strong opinions about his behavior. And how that's sort of juxtaposed against me saying that we will never know the true answers. And I guess I'll just like put out a little disclaimer here. I do fully believe that we don't know the answers to any of these questions. Like, we will never know if binoculars would have actually helped them. But I do think we can look at common sense and see that go ahead, buy a pair of binoculars, go outside at night and try to find something far away. You need light for binoculars to work. So I will pretty confidently tell you that Fleet saying that binoculars are equally useful at night makes me feel more likely that he's trying to defend himself by blaming the fact that the officers did not supply him with what he needed. But I don't really need to ask you to believe that because Fleet will kind of say it himself here in a second. When you use the glasses or have the glasses to use, what part of the time do you have the glasses to your eyes, and what part of the time do you depend on your naked eyesight?
If we fancied we saw anything on the horizon, we would have the glasses to make sure.
That is, if you saw anything on the horizon with the naked eye. You understand what I mean by that, do you not?
Yes, sir.
That is, you would use the glasses.
To make sure before you reported.
Then you depend on your eyesight to see before you use the glasses.
Yes.
So that exchange, and that's a different senator. Senator Burton steps in to ask that question. So he has like a hunch about something. He wants a specific answer from Fleet. And I think what he's getting at, and what I think Fleet kind of just agreed to, is Fleet can say all he wants that the glasses are equally useful at night and that he could have used them. But the way they use glasses are exactly like Lightholler says they should be used, which is you use your naked eyesight until you see something on the horizon. Then you send that information, you call the bridge, and then they're the ones who kind of look into it. But let's say he has binoculars. Fleet is literally agreeing here that they would wait to see something and then pull out the binoculars. There's no way that in that moment before he sees the iceberg, he would have had the glasses up to his eyes because he literally didn't see anything. So Senator Burton is stepping in here to just sort of explain that this is a moot point. So glasses or no glasses, we will debate this till the end of time. Oh, well, let's get to the actual event, the moment where Frederick Fleet's testimony is the most valuable. Did you keep a sharp lookout for ice?
Yes, sir.
Tell what you did.
Well, I reported an iceberg right ahead, a black mass.
Who sighted the black mass first, you or Lee?
I did. I say I did, but I think he was just as soon as me.
What did you report when you saw this black mass Sunday night?
I reported an iceberg right ahead.
To whom did you report that?
I struck 3 bells first, then I went straight to the telephone and rang them up on the bridge.
Did you get anyone on the bridge?
I got an answer straight away. What did I see, or what did you see?
Did the person who was talking to you tell you who he was?
No. He just asked me what did I see. I told him an iceberg right ahead.
What did he say then?
He said, "Thank you."
And so we have that famous conversation. Iceberg right ahead, thank you. What a wild thing to say. I know I talked about that last year, but if I remember correctly, there's a bit of an explanation as to why the response is thank you coming up here in a second. But before we move forward, there is one piece missing to that conversation that I just discovered in this. I didn't discover it, but I discovered it for myself in this testimony. We all know the conversation. It's very well recreated in the 1997 James Cameron film. And as Fleet describes it here, Officer Moody, Sixth Officer Moody, who is the officer who picks up the phone, he says, "What do you see?" Fleet says, "Iceberg right ahead." And he replies with "thank you." But there's one thing missing that I've never heard before, and it's here in the testimony. Fleet says,
Before I reported, I said, "There is ice ahead."
so there's this random comment there that before he rang the bell, before he picked up the phone, before he said anything, the first words out of Frederick Fleet's mouth when he sees the iceberg is he says to Lee, "There is ice ahead." I think that is wild that that's not more widely known. I think it's just fascinating. This moment in history, the very first words out of someone's mouth just aren't mentioned very often. That the first thing is, "What do you see?" Iceberg right ahead. Thank you. I mean, iceberg right ahead is such a great phrase, but the very first words out of Fleet's mouth in all movies moving forward should always be, "There is ice ahead," and then grab the bell. If I direct a movie, that's what we'll do. And the iceberg struck the ship at what point?
On the starboard bow, just before the foremast.
When she struck this obstacle, or this black mass, was there much of a jar to the ship?
No, sir. Just a slight grinding noise.
Not sufficient to disturb you in your position in the crow's nest.
No, sir.
Did it alarm you seriously when it struck?
No, sir. I thought it was a narrow shave.
Avid listeners of this podcast will know how much I love the survivors' descriptions of what the collision felt like. There's such a varied response from everyone. And here is Fleet's, just a grinding noise, and he thought it was a narrow shave. Fascinating. This last bit of collision-based testimony answers a little question about why Fleet rang the bell 3 times, and I think this gives a little insight into why Officer Moody chose to say thank you at the end of that conversation. What does 3 bells mean?
That means a vessel, or whatever it is, right ahead. It indicates anything right ahead, any object.
It indicates that there is some object right ahead. Is it a warning to people on the bridge that there is danger ahead?
No, not always. Just to let them know that there is some object ahead.
So the 3 bells that we sort of think of as synonymous with the iceberg collision, with a warning, it's often very frantic in recreations of it. It's just important from Officer Moody's perspective, who isn't looking at an iceberg. He's walking to the telephone, which is ringing. He heard 3 bells. That could be, there's an object 2 miles away. That could be anything. The last thing he's expecting, quite honestly, is that there's an iceberg so close that we're not going to be able to avoid it. So when he says iceberg right ahead, he just says thank you because this is routine. And I don't think we get that very often. So hearing that from Fleet, just confirmation that the 3 bells doesn't actually mean danger. It just means something is ahead. So now we have covered Fleet's experience in probably the best seat in the house for the most famous iceberg collision of all time. Now we move on to his time after the collision, something you may never have really heard about. Even Titanic people may not know Fleet's exact whereabouts after his big moment in the crow's nest. So let's hear about it. Tell the committee what you did after you left the crow's nest that night.
I went down below and found there was nobody down there, and the quartermaster come down and said we're all wanted on the bridge.
Did you go up to the bridge?
I went up on the boat deck.
What did they say to you up there?
I did not see anyone there. I seen them all at the boats, getting them ready and putting them out.
What did you do?
I helped to get the port boat out.
How many of those boats did you help lower?
I lowered number 6 to the rail.
How many sailors or men of the crew were put into number 6?
Me and Quartermaster Hitchens.
So very quickly, his testimony puts him in a lifeboat. As we talked about last year, a lot of people, they retell the story where they feel the collision or see the collision, and then suddenly they're in a lifeboat because the time in between isn't as interesting, or at least they don't have the memory of it. But one interesting thing here, he's put into Lifeboat 6 with Quartermaster Hitchens, who was the quartermaster at the wheel at the time of the collision. He is the one turning the wheel to starboard, to hard to starboard, to avoid the iceberg. And so these 2 men are 2 halves of a very important moment in history, and they are somehow in the same boat. After lowering the lifeboat to the boat deck, did he get in first or you?
I was told by Mr. Lightholler to get in the boat and help the women in.
You got in by direction of the second officer
Yes, sir.
and helped the women in.
Yes, sir.
How many men were in the boat?
5.
Who were they?
3 men passengers and 2 of the crew.
Who were the passengers?
I do not know. There was 1 steerage and 2 first.
So this is where some of the fun of researching Titanic comes from. It's that puzzle of which lifeboat are we talking about? Which passengers are we talking about? Can we use Fleet's testimony versus Lightholler's testimony to compile who these people are, who 1 steerage passenger and 2 first? Do we know who these people are? Are we going to be able to talk to them later in this inquiry? So part of the trouble here is we know Lightholler loaded this boat. We know that from his episodes, and we know that from this episode. But when Lightholler describes loading boats, he unfortunately doesn't often say things like Lifeboat 6 and Lifeboat 8. He just says the first boat, the second boat, the third boat I loaded. He just goes in order in which he remembers them happening. But what's interesting here is Fleet actually confirms which boat was first.
As soon as I loaded number 6 and number 8, Mr. Lightholler made me get in number 6 and ship the rudder and put the women in.
Was number 8 loaded after number 6?
It was.
It was lowered after number 6, was it?
Yes.
That's fascinating because there are people in this world who fight over whether 8 or 6 was launched first, or loaded first, or lowered first. I'm certain there are many testimonials that contradict what Fleet is saying, but he very clearly says they launched 6 first. Lightholler, when he describes what we believe to be Lifeboat 6, it's like his 5th boat. He's describing very clearly Lifeboat 6, but it is not the first or second boat that he lowered. So it gets very complicated. But what we do know for sure is Fleet is in Lifeboat 6. Whether it left first, second, third, fourth, or fifth, he's in Lifeboat 6. And what's fun about that for us is if you've seen the 1997 film by James Cameron, Lifeboat 6 happens to be the lifeboat that Rose gets in with her mother and with Maggie Brown, and she jumps out of to get back on board. That is Lifeboat 6. And so every time we cut to that lifeboat and we see Rose's mom and Maggie Brown fighting with Robert Hitchens, telling her to shut that hole in her face, all that drama takes place in Lifeboat 6. And if you go back and watch the film, in the background of those scenes in that lifeboat, you will see the actor who played Frederick Fleet during the Iceberg collision. So once again, James Cameron and his team of historians doing their work at a very high level. So if we know that Frederick Fleet boarded Lifeboat 6 and he's in Lifeboat 6 for the rest of the night, and he says there are 3 men, 1 steerage, whatnot, do we know who these people are? Well, we do, sort of. So he says that there are 5 men total, Hitchens and Fleet, who we can confirm are in that boat, but also 2 first-class men and a steerage man. The only people we can say for sure are one of the first-class men and the steerage man. There doesn't seem to be any evidence that there is a second first-class man. And there is no name on Encyclopedia Titanica, who I often go to for things like passenger lists in lifeboats, even though the odds of us knowing who's in what boat are just super low. It's a real guessing game. But if you go and look at this list, you can see that there are only 4 men on board. And Arthur Puchin is one of them, the first-class man. We learned all about him in Lightholler's episode. He was the older gentleman, 52 years old, who stepped forward when Lifeboat 6 needed someone else to row. And he apparently, like Indiana Jones, jumped out and grabbed a rope and lowered himself multiple stories into the boat. A super dramatic moment in the sinking that this 52-year-old man did something, pretty superhuman, it seems. That is this boat, and that is why we know when Lightholler's talking about Lifeboat 6, because it's clearly Puchin. It's the only time that this happens. And so how he has it so late in his testimony, I really don't know. But we can confirm Puchin is in this boat. The steerage passenger, we can also confirm as being, and I apologize for my pronunciation of this name. He's listed in parentheses as Philip Zenny, which is probably his Americanized name because he had already immigrated to the United States and would have already had an Americanized name. But his real name, if I'm saying this right, is Fahim Ruhana al-Zahini, is what I'm going to go with. If you know how to actually pronounce that name, please send me a voice memo, and I'll say something on our next episode. But he is the steerage passenger that Fleet mentions. But he says one other thing later in his testimony that gives us a bit more insight.
We had a stowaway. Where he came from, I do not know.
When did you first see him?
He was underneath the seat. We saw him as soon as we got clear. He showed himself then. He was an Italian.
So lots to unpack. One being that he says he was a stowaway and he hid in the boat and made himself, appeared once they got away from the ship. This is likely true because we're talking about Lightholler here. Lightholler loaded this boat and he was very strict. Women only, no men. Which is why I don't believe there is a second first-class man in this boat, because Lightholler would never allow a first-class man into the boat. Puchin only got to go because of the necessity of the moment. So he certainly wouldn't have let a third-class man in. So it seems if this gentleman wanted to live, if this steerage gentleman wanted to live, he was going to have to stow away, and so he did. Now, Fleet describes him as Italian. This is complicated because describing a foreigner as an Italian was the sort of basic racism of the time. Everybody was Italian. Anybody who wasn't just like a white-skinned person, they just were Italian. This is something that will come up with Officer Lowe's testimony when we get to him one day. He refers to a group of people rushing the boat, a group of Italians rushing the boat. And he says it in a very derogatory way, and he actually has to apologize, oddly enough. But here, Fleet is referring to him as an Italian. Whether he's just saying that because that's what people say or he literally thought he looked like an Italian, I can tell you now he was from Syria, which is fascinating. How many people out there knew that there were Syrian passengers aboard Titanic? There were a few. And so here is Fahim Rouhana al-Zahini. I'll put the spelling on the screen right now if you're watching on YouTube. You can, and if you're not watching on YouTube, go check out at Witness Titanic Pod Instagram. I'll put his picture up and I'll put his name up. And if you happen to know how to pronounce his name, please let me know and we will get it right. So now we have to move on to a much more important topic, which is how many people were in this lifeboat? Did Lighthauler do a good job loading this boat that can hold 65 people? He says in his own testimony that the first few boats that he lowered, which this would have been one of them, he said about 20 to 25 in the first and second boats. So that's not great. When Fleet is asked, he says,
"It was full up, but it could have took a few more forward where I was."
How many do you think you had in it altogether?
About 30.
So here is just another example of somebody in a Titanic lifeboat saying something like it was full, and in the same conversation, in the same breath, saying the number 30 or 25. These lifeboats look full when they're only half full, which we need to remember when we talk about Titanic, because everybody likes to point at these lifeboats that they're half full. How could this happen? What a travesty. How poorly run the whole evacuation was. And while that is still true, it seems to just be the running thing, is that these survivors are misunderstanding how many people they're actually fitting in these boats. So he says the boat was full up and it could have taken a few more, and then he says 30, even though there's 35 extra that could still fit. Now, what's fun about Lifeboat 6 is we actually have a photo of it arriving at the Carpathia. So you can literally look at this photo, which you will find on our Instagram, and you can count how many people are in the boat, and there seems to be about 24. Should mention one person was added while they were in the water from another lifeboat. So it seems like the most likely number, between Lighthauler saying 20 to 25, Fleet saying 30. The picture shows 24, but we need to take off one. And, Encyclopedia Titanica says 22. You can kind of get an idea of where this lifeboat sits amongst the evacuation numbers, and it's not good. Could you say whether or not you loaded all the people in number 6 that could be safely loaded in the boat?
Well, I loaded all the women. I got in number 6, all the women that were knocking around the deck at the time, those who were around the boat at the time.
Were there any women left on the deck who did not get in the boats?
I did not see any. All that was there got in the boats, but they may have come up afterwards when we were lowered. I could not say.
Did you call for all that were about to come and get in the boats?
Yes, sir.
Were there any men left who did not get in the boats?
Yes, there were men there, but the order was only women.
That's a big comment to make. We talk a lot about how Lighthauler was women and children only, and Murdoch was women and children first. This is one of the only times somebody just flat out says that the order was only women. Fantastic testimony. I should throw a little disclaimer in here. I'm saying a lot of about Lifeboat 6 being the first or second or third lifeboat. That is the first, second, or third of Lighthauler's side of the ship. We heard from his episodes that he lowered one lifeboat down to A deck, and then these are some of the first boats to go. There are lifeboats on the other side that are going. So when Fleet actually reaches the water in Lifeboat 6, with Hitchens, with Puchin, with our steerage Syrian passenger, and about 20 women. It is about 1 a.m. So again, for context, Iceberg collision is at 11:40, and then the sinking is 2:20 a.m. So they literally launched this boat at the halfway point of the sinking. So this next part is very funny to me. We've talked already about Arthur Puchin, who descended heroically like a superhero down multiple stories to the boat. That is a story that we hear from Lightholler, and Lightholler says, if you are sailor enough to get down those falls, you can do it, and he was very brave to do it. So we have this idea of what Puchin did is very heroic. Well, Fleet's perspective of it isn't that impressive. Did anyone step into your boat, man or woman, and then step out of it?
No, sir. There was just one passenger when we was lowering away come in the boat.
Who was that?
One of the men passengers.
How far had you gotten below the boat deck?
It was not very far, just about the length of the table down. He got over the life lanyard and swung in and come down the fall.
So Fleet remembers that they were not very far from below the boat deck, about the length of the table down. So he's referencing a table in the room. And he does this a lot in his testimony when describing distances. He refers to the various objects around him, which is unfortunate for us, of course. But the table can't be terribly long, I don't suppose. But it's very interesting that we have this idea of Puchin descending, and even when we did that episode, I thought of it that way. But here's Fleet saying that just about the length of the table down, not very far. So maybe it wasn't that impressive. Who knows? Maybe we'll have other testimony to back up one or the other in future episodes. And what did you do then?
We got the oars and pulled for the light that was on the port bow.
Did you see it?
Yes, sir.
What happened there?
We could not get up to it. There were only 2 of us pulling.
So this brings up our next conversation that we must have. There were only 2 of us pulling. So wait a minute. Puchin just descended potentially heroically into the lifeboat, so he can row. Fleet is clearly rowing because he says there was only 2 of us pulling. So those are our 2 rowers. We have a steerage passenger who at this point is still hidden, and then a bunch of women. There's only one other definite man in the boat, and that is Quartermaster Hitchens, who was at the wheel for the collision. Why was Hitchens not rowing? Well, it's pretty commonly known now that Quartermaster Hitchens' behavior in Lifeboat 6 was less than stellar, and according to many women in the boat, he just refused to row, and Fleet sort of backs them up here. Will you tell the committee as far as you can what the quartermaster did? Did he take charge of the lifeboat?
He took charge.
What did he do? Where did he sit in the boat?
At the tiller all the time.
Did anyone propose to pull toward the place where the Titanic went down?
All the women asked us to pull there before she went down, but the quartermaster was in charge, and he would not allow it. He told us to keep on pulling.
Did the women in your boat persist in their efforts to get him to go back to the scene of the wreck?
They asked him, but he would not hear of it. He told us to keep on pulling.
Did you say anything about it to the quartermaster?
No, I never said a word. I just pulled an oar. I just kept quiet.
Wild. So this is kind of fun to hear from Fleet's perspective. You know, a colleague, you know, they're in the same department, a quartermaster and a lookout. They would know each other. And potentially by this time, Fleet might even know of the claims of these passengers, these women having a bad experience with Quartermaster Hitchens sort of being yelled at all night long. So here is Fleet confirming that he not only refused to row, he was at the tiller the whole time. Well, he doesn't confirm that he refused to row, but he confirms that he did not row. And then he would not go back for people. All around, Hitchens not looking good in history. So we now move into the final moments of the Titanic disaster from Fleet's perspective. Did you see her go down?
No, sir.
Why not?
The lights were out, and we were too far away.
You could not see her when she disappeared?
No, sir.
At that time, could you hear cries of distress?
Very faint.
Very many?
Altogether, I suppose. A loud cry.
And there you have it. Frederick Fleet, one of the key players in the Titanic disaster, certainly one of the key players in the Iceberg collision. He is the first witness of our inquiry who sees the iceberg collision take place. Most of our witnesses to this point were asleep or in their cabin getting ready for bed, and one of our witnesses, I believe, saw the iceberg after the collision. He saw it go by. But here is somebody who saw the point of contact being just ahead of the foremast. So a true key member of this story. And now you have heard at least his United States inquiry. His UK inquiry is equally fascinating, including a moment where he essentially walks off, like he refuses to answer more questions, and is very confrontational with the British Board of Trade. So we will get to that one day. I'm excited to show you that stuff. But you've now heard his story. He is a man who is, I guess you could say, his job was to avoid objects like this. But the more you learn about the lookouts of the time and you learn about the standards and practices of an ocean liner, the more you realize that it's not his job to avoid an iceberg collision. It's his job to point things out on the horizon or to point things out ahead, which he did. It's not really his fault that when he did it, the ship had no means of avoiding what he saw. And yes, if he had binoculars and happened to think, you know what, I'm just going to put them to my eye and look straight ahead and wait till I see something, perhaps they could have avoided the iceberg completely. We'll never know, but personally, I feel that to be a bit of a stretch. But that's just my humble opinion as your fake inquiry chairman. As for Frederick Fleet, after he says these words that we just digested, he would return to the sea for another 24 years. He would be married, have a daughter. He would even work for Harland and Wolff, the shipyard company that built Titanic. I wonder if he had any stories to exchange with the people who worked there, if anybody was willing to talk about it. Unfortunately, like far too many Titanic survivors, Frederick Fleet ended up taking his own life, which is terribly sad. It happened in 1965, so he was 77 years old, so he lived a particularly long life, which is great, but he lost his wife suddenly, and then I believe like a week later, his brother-in-law, so his wife's brother, who just lost his sister, he evicted Fleet, and so he took his own life later. A tragic story surrounding our already tragic story. So I suppose today give Frederick Fleet a little bit of your thought, and wish him well wherever he is. Folks, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Witness Titanic. As always, it is a pleasure to bring this episode to you. I find these words of a person like Frederick Fleet so fascinating. I hope you did as well. That's it for this episode. For our normal listeners, I will see you in our next episode, probably 2 weeks from now. But if you are a patron, if you support the inquiry through Patreon, we have a bit more to talk about. So I will be releasing a short, I don't know how long, but it'll be a little bit of extra testimony for our patrons to listen to. There's a whole section of his testimony where he's just so unwilling to answer questions. It's very fascinating. One of the senators even catches him at one point He's just very obviously trying not to cooperate. So we'll dive into that and talk about that with the patrons. If you want to hear that, consider joining us at patreon.com/witnesstitanic, and then that will become available to you. As always, pleasure talking to you all. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm your chairman, James Penca. Be kind to each other, Titanic community. We will adjourn until our next episode.